Latest charges of insider trading may just be the beginning. Our next guest says that the government will likely to get those charged to try to flip and testify against more senior hedge fund executives. Bradley Bondi is with us now. He is a former enforcement attorney from the SEC. He is now a partner at Cadwalader, Wickersham Taft. Bradley is an expert on insider trading and other white-collar crimes. Brad, thanks so much for joining us this morning. So let's start with this question. I mean, is this just the beginning of the charges that we will see, or is the government finished with this part of the food chain, this part of the web?
Well, the insider trading cases like this are like spider webs. They look to the initial source of the information and where that information went out in the chain. The question is, I think, is whether they're done with this side of the chain and going to move on to different parts of the web, or whether they hope to try to bring additional charges by getting these individuals to try to flip against other higher people in their fund. Now, it's important, though, to note here that these individuals seem to have been rogue employees from the allegations. They seem to try to circumvent their compliance procedures. They seem to have used outside email accounts and thumb drives, everything in order to avoid detection by compliance personnel, which suggests to me that they may have a difficult time building a case against other individuals at this fund.
And I was going to say, it seems to imply as well that the fund itself is not necessarily responsible. In other words, the legal exposure of a fund such as SAC Capital may be able to be limited if these were, as you say, rogue employees. Is that a fair deduction?
These funds have incredible compliance procedures already in place, these larger funds. And so it seems to me that with these individuals and the way they tried to operate outside of that chain, they're going to have a very difficult time of making any sort of allegations against the fund itself. But in these sorts of cases, charging the funds themselves are very difficult. It's very difficult factually, and it's very difficult legally. There's no just vicarious liability in insider trading cases. They need to show that there was some higher-up conduct with the funds, and they need to show that there was some ties to management, that the fund somehow blessed this. And the allegations in the criminal charges themselves actually suggest just the opposite, that these were rogue employees outside of the normal compliance chain, trying to avoid detection by their bosses. So
it seems as if based on everything that you're saying, that SAC Capital itself will face no litigation, will have no damages. We heard from our reporter John Ehrlichman, who's been covering the story as well, saying Stephen Cohen sent out a letter to investors saying, look, these charges, these people charged are not going to affect at all what happens at our fund. I want to ask you something, Brad. Should hedge funds just stop using these expert networks? I mean, have we gotten into a gray zone that it's just too hard to control and maybe leaves the funds too vulnerable?
That's a question I get asked often. Should we just stop using expert networks altogether, considering the scrutiny, considering the probe? And the answer to that is no. In fact, expert networks can actually foster compliance with the law, foster compliance with insider trading procedures, and ensure compliance. But what funds need to have in place is the appropriate compliance procedures and mechanisms to ensure that these expert networks are not being abused. But expert networks in and of themselves are not illegal. And certainly the SEC and the government hasn't suggested that. And what we're seeing from these charges here is not a situation on the gray area, it seems, but where individuals were actually getting information relating to earnings and the like, which is not in the gray area in most cases if these allegations turn out to be true.
Your conclusion seems to be don't paint the whole industry with a broad brush just for a few people who are operating outside the system. Bradley, thanks so much for joining us.